Thanks a lot, Vaibhav, for talking to me on such a short notice. If you can introduce yourself a little bit, and then maybe we can talk a little more on global Stocktake and what is happening.
Great, thank you, Rakesh, and thank you for this invitation. Very happy to be here. My introduction: I'm Vaibhav Chaturvedi. I'm a fellow at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. CEEW is one of Asia's leading climate-related think tanks. Essentially, we are a research institution, but something very important to us is engage with the government, both the national government in India across various ministries, but also many departments across state governments to advise policy, inform policy, and so that's the kind of work CEEW does. Yeah.
Great. So one of the things that you hear quite a lot here at the COP is GST. Okay.
Yes.
The first time I heard it, I was like, what GST are they talking about? But then I realized it is global Stocktake.
Yes.
So maybe can you tell a little bit about what global Stocktake is and why we are discussing about it in this COP? If you can tell a little bit about the history from Paris to now.
Sure. So under the Paris Agreement, when the discussions were happening, this realization came that, well, countries, of course, first of all, the process of Paris is based on a bottom-up approach, right? Earlier, the climate debate was kind of pretty top-down, right? Then people realized, the experts realized that, well, countries are not very happy with this kind of framing that drives many of the targets from the top. So every country should kind of think about its own targets, and that's why this whole nationally determined contribution came into the picture. So every country decides its own target, right? But at the same time, we need to have a sense of the collective progress, right? And that's the how do we do it institutionally, right? Of course, there are a lot of researchers, and everybody keeps on doing independent think tank. They keep on doing this collective assessments and all, which is fine. But how does the formal process, like the formal United Nations process, does the regular, assessment in an institutional way, in a institutionalized way, so to speak, right? So that's where the idea was GST was born, right? That was the first element, right? So that's the idea. But we don't want to just assess. There's no point in assessing and saying we are not on track.
Yes.
So GST is also institutionally a ratcheting mechanism, like a ratcheting mechanism for enhancing ambition to be aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement, right? So what does ratcheting mechanism means? It simply means, let's say GST assessment, whatever will happen, we'll come to know, on various three big themes: mitigation, adaptation, and means of implementation. Means of implementation essentially is finance, technology, cooperation, all those kinds of things, right? So on these three big themes, there will be a stocktake, right? And then once we find, let's say that we are not on track, then what do you do to ratchet up your ambition to ensure that you now come back to the track, right? So that was the motivation, right? Assessment and ratcheting of ambition in an institutional way, right? As far as the process is concerned, GST has three stages. One stage is information collection stage, in which all the parties submit a lot of information that is required. Not just parties. This process is also very inclusive. So many think tanks, many independent civil society groupings. Like I am a part of something called the Independent Global Stocktake Program, which is a network of civil society, international network of civil society organizations across the world, right? Just focusing on the GST process, right? IGST also has its own submission to the GST process. So very inclusive, basically. Anybody, any institution beyond the parties can submit.
Parties are countries.
Right. Countries. Yeah, parties are countries, but there are also country groupings like BASIC, LMDC, and all that. So anybody can submit essentially information in the for the information collection phase, right? Some parties have, some is like requirement, and then a lot of other information can be put in, right? Then there is a technical assessment phase. So all the information that is collected, the technical assessment phase essentially collates all that information and creates some messages or finds some messages at the global level, right? Something very important, I emphasize, it is a collective exercise, which means we don't want to know like individual countries' progress. That is not the point of GST. It's a collective exercise. So collectively, are we on the goal? Right? Not individual countries exercise. So the technical summary or technical assessment also, then that's why it looks at collective picture. Right? So that's
collectively, if we are under 1.5 degrees or.
Well, as I said, the goals of the Paris Agreement is actually not 1.5 degrees. If you look at the exact text, the text is well below 2 degrees to pursue efforts to achieve 1.5 degrees. So that's why I'm always not saying 1.5, I am saying goals of the Paris Agreement, right? So whichever way you interpret it, right? But yes, the technical summary says this, but also in terms of debate, the question always is it 1.5 degrees C aligned? Now that is not the exact goal of the Paris Agreement, but there is a debate. All of us want to know because climate impact is happening. So that's why many times you hear that language. You know, the 1.5 degrees C aligned or not. So yes, the technical assessment does tell us many of those high-level messages, and that's a technical assessment. Then the third phase is political consideration, which is this COP. So information that coming from the technical assessment now goes into the political consideration process, right? So these three phases together go across 2 years, right? So it's a 2-year long process, right? So this GST, for example, we are sitting in 2023 December, 2021 December. After that, this process started. So the first some time was given for information collection, and this is all very structured. Some time for technical assessment.
Global goal for adaptation starts at the same time, right? Or,
yeah, but that's a different thing altogether. This is a separate process.
So I was under the impression that global goal of adaptation also has to feed into the global stocktake.
Everything, yeah, because as I said, it is mitigation, adaptation, and means of implementation. So finance also has to feed in. Everything. So the stocktake is the financial targets that the developed world gave. Have they met it? Now that's a stocktake. And the ratcheting part will be, well, you have failed miserably in achieving. So now what do you need to do, given not just and it is given not just this history, but also what are the new demands that need to come in, right? So it's not just 100 billion forever. Now every economy is expanding. We have to accelerate. Maybe more money support is required, more financial support. So how do you? So that's a new quantified goal on finance, right? So many of all the elements are actually going to be reflected in the GST on these three big pillars. But as a process, these three phases of the process, they go across 2 years. The culmination happens at the COP. At the COP, it enters into the political consideration process, right? So this is first, and this is the first GST, official GST. It is expected to happen every 5 years. So something very important I want to share with all the audience here, that when Prime Minister said that he proposed right now, it's not he proposed that India would like to host COP in 2028, right? That's a GST COP. That's also very interesting. It coincides with the GST process. So the next official GST will happen in India, the political consideration part, right? But the information collection will actually start from 2027 onwards, right?
We'll have 2 years again for
2 years, right? So end of 2027 beginning. So you have the whole 2027 and 2028. The end of 2028 is when COP happens. That's the political consultation part, which will happen in India, right? So this is the whole process around GST.
So once we have, all the information with the committee, like how do they synthesize it? I mean, I want to understand because there are way too many groups, right? Like you said, parties or institutions that have come collectively together and put forward the data. Like how is it merged and say that this is the amount of emissions that we have produced for mitigation, or these are the actions in adaptation that we have done, this much of finance is done, because there might be also overlaps that will happen, and I find it a lot cumbersome. How does that process happen?
So it is cumbersome on some aspect. Let's say emissions, it is relatively easier because we have emissions data, so that's kind of pretty straightforward. On some aspects like finance is very confusing because we don't even have a definition of finance. So India's environment minister also has very clearly emphasized, I think yesterday, that lack of definition. All these guys, developed world guys, OECD keeps on claiming that we have hit the moon, that 100 billion is very easily we have done it. We don't have and in that the language around finance is very interesting. It says a new, predictable, additional. Something like that. So it's a very interesting language around finance that has to be new and predictable and additional finance, and that whether the definition, if you don't have a definition, you have no way to know that is additional or new, right? And all the private sector funding that is happening, for example, it is also included. Now, how is it new and additional and all that? So, in absence of definition, these things, and that's where the challenge is. So, GST will, of course, officially, whatever numbers are coming in, it will have to take cognizance of those numbers. But it also gives some other numbers around, it will always present if there is uncertainty, it will also have some sense of uncertainty in those numbers to be presented there. And a lot of other qualitative information like adaptation. There's so much happening here and there.
Yes.
So of course it tries to capture to the best extent possible.
Yes.
It is more complicated. Adaptation is much more complicated because it's local in nature.
Yeah.
Happening at, like, it's not like one number for one country like
Yes.
emissions.
Yes.
So it is complicated.
Yes. I mean, a country like UAE has different ways to adapt compared to a country like India.
Exactly.
Where you have, the weather is also completely different. The climate
Exactly.
is different.
Exactly. But you have to make some assessment of how many, let's say, disasters have happened, right? So you can give some high level number. You can say how countries are adapting to it. You can give a lot of examples. So yes, it's much more challenging. But the job of the co-chairs of this, let's say, technical assessment, committees and panels, are they have to find a message. Ultimately, technical assessment it will have a lot of numbers and all, but it's also about giving some important messages for the political consideration. So that's the third phase. So yes, that's their job. It is not an easy job, but that's the part of the official process.
Nice, that's very interesting. So, but how does this, global stocktake, it ensure fairness? I mean, I know it's all the numbers have come in, we have crunched it, and hopefully, by the end of this COP, we will come out with a text talking, which is agreed upon by the political parties, right? We have a draft that has come out, and today I think there's going to be a second draft that's going to come out, right?
Yes.
And what do you think? Will there be a final text that we'll all agree upon? One, what is your opinion? Two, how does this, ensure that fairness and it includes all countries' perspectives?
Yeah, and that's a very important point because the language around GST is that GST in the light of equity and fairness. So that's something like that. That's the kind of language. So it very clearly upfront says GST has to be in the light of equity. Right? So as a principle, it is enshrined in the language. The challenge always is the practicality. Like, how do you define equity? There is no definition of equity. There is no common understanding of what is equity. There are different perspectives of equity. For example, India's position is always about equity in carbon space. Right? For our development, we need carbon space. That is India's position on equity. That's not the kind of globally accepted position in the negotiation process of equity. And there people talk about different kinds of equity, economic equity, energy equity, So yes, so equity is there. As a principle, everybody is agreed. Operationalization is where all this confusion is there. And that's where you see so much tussle happening on equity. And the feeling in the developing world is very clearly that this extremely important principle of equity is being sidelined. And that is because, our conception of equity is like carbon space related and all. And that is definitely not being accepted in any, there's zero progress on that kind of part of the debate, right? So yes, it is a letdown for the developing world, but at the same time, procedural fairness is there. Procedural fairness means that every country has the right to say what it wants. So India always continues to say these kinds of things. As I said, non-party stakeholders like us, we submit GST text. We always include, like the IGST, as I said, independent global stocktake. In our submissions, we highlight that these are very important principles. They have to be adhered to. So we continue to reinforce the notion so that it should not happen that even at the principal level, it is kind of now totally taken off. For all we know, if we stop saying these very important things, even at principal level, it will be omitted from the text itself, right? So there is a very real possibility. It's very important to reinforce these messages and narratives. But yes, when it comes to the practical level, it does appear that the climate debate is becoming inequitable by the day. Developing world is expected to take more and more actions in absence of the finance and other support that is required and needed for accelerated actions and all that. That's what, unfortunately, like on the ground, that is what you could say the evolution that is happening. So principles, it's all there. It is there in light of equity and all. For example, I would love to see a text that says that actions are, this exact language, the actions on finance and mitigation by developed parties have made perpetuated climate inequities. That will be great, but the panel will never say that, because
it's a negotiation at the end of the day.
But the technical panel can say that, but the definition is not clear from a technical point of view. If the definition is not there, how will anybody say or make this kind of assessment, right? But we know, the developing world is very kind of unanimous in this regard that this is definitely becoming inequitable in practice. Whatever we keep on saying at the level of the principles.
Even at finance level, UAE has given a lot more financing compared to US, right? It is becoming inequitable even in finance, where developing countries are, supporting more.
Yes, yes. So, I mean, I think what you are referring to is for the loss and damage fund,
Yes.
and that is also voluntary contributions, right?
Yeah.
Maybe let's not read too much into it. These are one-time contribution because it's a nice thing that happened, great thing that happened. As I said, finance. Yes, I mean another thing with finance, not just new additional predictable. It also has to be replenishable. So we don't want one time you commit and give it. The pot has to be replenished all the time. And they're very important, So unless that institutional things happen with finance, voluntary contribution, of course, we welcome anything.
Yeah.
But it is not a replacement to the other real thing,
Of course.
Yeah.
Nice. No, so what difficulties does Stocktake face, and how are they being handled right now? Like we were discussing, what is also your expectation that will we have a text by the end of the COP?
Yeah.
Other than the difficulties that we are facing.
Yeah, so I mean, let me put it this way: information collection phase, okay, very easy. A lot of inclusivity. Technical assessment is the next level of complication. Political consideration, of course, just because of the global climate politics, it is the most complicated part, because that's where all these principles of equity and all really come to the fore, right? And there's this big divide between the developing and the developed world, the perspectives of both of them. The developing world the developed world continues to change the language in a way that perpetuates inequity. In fact, just to also let you know that the loss and damage fund, if you read it, there is no mention of historical responsibility in the whole text, right? And that is one way. So there is no mention of anything, equity, historical responsibility, and nothing is mentioned. CBDR, nothing is mentioned there. And that text is accepted. On the first day, that was the big, we said, great. But where is equity in the whole text? There is no equity in the whole text, not even mention of the word. And that's exactly what I was saying. If you forget reinforcing this important messages at that level, that India always continues to do, very conveniently, it will be sidelined. Right? So yes, the political consideration phase is where the most contested phase of this whole process, and many elements, because not equity is one thing, but the whole thing about why do we need to focus on coal and not fossil? It is so bizarre, because at the first line is in the light of best available science, right? The best available science, which is like, let's say IPCC, right? It says fossil. It talks about net zero. Net zero is not about coal. It is not about any one fossil fuel. Right? So net zero is about all fossil fuels. So it is so bizarre that you agree to the first thing about best available science, but then and net zero and everything, but then in practice you say no, it should be only coal. It should not be any fossil
or natural gas
or oil. So these are very illogical positions, but these are very positions motivated by country interests, because everybody is thinking about their own interests at the same time, right? Yes, that is the most contested phase and challenging phase, and on so many different aspects. Fossil phase out is one, finance is another, the limitless number of things, carbon market is another, where all these contests happen.
And there's also this discussion about phasing down or phasing out. What do you think, will be a compromise that all of them will come out with? Because even when I was talking with the Minister, Mr. Bhupendra Yadav, he was also saying the same, that phasing out is something that we can't, there is no way that you can do phase out. Phase down is something that we can discuss. But then, what are other countries feeling, and how do you think it's going to play out in the next few days?
Yeah, well, I think countries by and large agree it has phased down. Right? All the countries that are having a veto in the process, let's say in some way, let's say USA, Saudi, China, even EU, natural gas, Russia, India, none of them are actually talking about phase out. Everybody, so by and large, interestingly, the language right now which is there in the text around fossil, there are 4 options. All is about phase out. There is no phase down at all, which was very interesting to me, right? But it does appear if fossil is there, phase out will have to be changed. They will change it to phase down. That is the first thing. Second interesting thing, it is not just fossil phase out. Right now what is mentioned in 2 options is unabated fossil phase out. Now there is another interesting insertion in the text, right? So what might be accepted, let's say if it is accepted, right? Let's say if the countries really want to say something about fossil, there is agreement, then the most likely is unabated fossil fuel phase down.
Can you explain a little about what unabated fossil fuel?
So unabated essentially maybe talks about the growth rate, that that okay, let's say phase down, phase out is not there, unabated fossil fuel growth is there, which means you're not even worried about the growth, growing at very fast, you're not worried about the growth rate, right?
Okay.
So now you say no, unabated fossil fuel phase down. So the growth rate essentially is what you are saying is going down. Absolute sense it is not going down. Something like that, right? Something like that is what is the language, would be the compromise language that might be struck, and we will celebrate it if that happens, because at least they're talking about fossil, which will be a big message if that comes out. But yes, let's see if that happens. It will, anything more than this is going to be a great bonus for all of us. Anything more than this.
Okay, nice. That is what you think will, by the end of tomorrow night, right? 12th is going to be the last
Yes,
week, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Not on 13th.
Yes.
Do you think there will be something on, like, something that will be finalized?
Final text, you mean?
Yes.
The presidency has been very, very clear and very, very forthright, as you know, right? Very direct, that, and repeatedly this message, repeated message, right? 12th is the last day. We want to take, please accelerate your action. That has always been the case. But looking at the number of, disagreements right now there. I mean, see, the question is, if you want to end by 12th, then you will end it, I mean, the presidency says, no, what doesn't matter, I've already got this loss and damage fund in the first day, and some progress on GGA, great achievements, everything else pushed to next COP, intersessionals and COPs and all those. One can very well end it, but if you want to achieve some really complicated things, even more, then of course, even one day, and with all-nighters for the negotiators, that is also very challenging to cross that line.
Someone was telling me that since COP15, there's not been a single COP where it didn't go overtime.
Yes, there has been no single COP. Yeah. So it will be a surprise if it happens this time. But that simply means presidency has said, well, okay, we have got what we wanted already. Done,
The lights off.
Yes.
Great. Thanks a lot for talking with me. It was wonderful. I'm sure, a lot of people who are hearing about global Stocktake but want to know a lot more about it will find this very helpful.
Great. Thank you again for this opportunity, Rakesh.
Pleasure.
Lovely coming here. Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Pleasure.